Greetings. This is Lo Gelder, and this is another installment of Let's Talk Consciousness. And the last video I uploaded seems to have become kind of strangely relevant. Today's August 12th, 2017, and this is after a couple of days ago posting a video about violence breaking out at Trump rallies and the counter protests that ensue. Basically, anytime there's a clash between far left and far right, it seems. And in that video, I refer to what are fistfights, basically. And then today, something far more dramatic happens when somebody drives their car through other human beings. I mean, it's just this unthinkably fucked up thing that just should not happen. It just should not have happened. Like that's I don't know how else to say it, but it does seem relevant that you know to back up a bit, since this is not necessarily continuous. Somebody could be seeing this for the first time. In these segments of what I call Let's Talk Consciousness, I am setting out to discuss various aspects of consciousness as the sort of either the lens through which we see reality and the necessity for cleaning that lens, for clearing ourselves of a lot of our negative beliefs and our resentment. But from another point of view, also seeing the whole thing as consciousness, and that we are, manifesting an experience. And so that's obviously a very particular filter to look at reality. But as I've been doing this, I'm trying to emphasize all these ways in which it's important to forgive everyone, forgive yourself and others, to love others unconditionally, to love yourself unconditionally, as this sort of like true north on the compass for improving the quality of your consciousness. I guess regardless of whether or not reality is founded on consciousness, or if it is a materialistic universe based on just hard what hard science can tell us. But anyway, so now I'm jumping around a bit. So anyway, last video, I'm pointing to the necessity, or I guess what I would encourage everyone to do when they're looking at people who they think that are their enemies, is to try to find some sort of way of regarding them, as worthy, as human beings, and certainly not as subhuman. And I think the worst of it comes when we look at a group of other people and we think, in general terms, there ought to be a law that stops those people, or those people ought to be killed, or those people ought to go to hell, or those people ought to be locked up. It's variations on this idea that these people as a group need to be contained in some way. And obviously we do have social behaviors that we do have to act to prevent, murder, driving cars into crowds of people being one of them. But my point being that it is the very thing that I was talking about that makes that possible. Like, to sit behind the wheel of a car and to think, I mean, I was going to use the phrase to think it's a good idea to just drive through a few people, but I don't think that person would even, who the fuck knows what they're thinking. But my point is, clearly they're viewing the people that they're trying to hurt with this car, or bullets, or whatever they're going to use in whatever, whatever banner it is. People use violence to make a point. Crazy people use violence when they feel like it means something, or that it's sending a message, or any number of things. But the point is, you as a primary condition have to look at other people as subhuman, as worthy of being, of not having worthiness, but also being worthy of this sort of intervention that you think of, whatever that is. And we're in the midst of a situation where people on the far right view people on the far left, and vice versa, as the cause of a problem, of a huge social ill that needs to be remedied, and that it's justified in any means necessary. I mean, that's literally, by any means, the phrase that was being used, that I was talking about in the last video that I I'm trying to really, you know, point some sort of counter um, influence that that's the kind of thinking that makes this possible. Somebody thought it was important enough by any means necessary to act out against people they thought were the enemy, and in this case, somebody chose to do it with their car, and tomorrow it'll be something else. But and yesterday it was something else. It's not necessarily new or an epidemic, but it's just a thing that's happening, and it's on an uptick. But I still think overall the real solution, the overriding solution to all of this, is to really find ways to look at these people in these other groups as fundamentally the same as you, and not the people who fucking resort to violence. I mean, in particularly killing, because that's that's a different situation altogether. That's you treat that differently. But I'm just talking about the people who are still operating with just their words and their opinions, and even if those words and opinions are repulsive to you, like that, to find some way to view them as human beings, and to to bridge this enormous gap that you think makes them, I keep saying it, but subhuman, that makes them, deserving of some negative fate. And it's like, I think we all are our best selves when we look at somebody we disagree with and just hope for the best for them. Like, hope that they grow out of whatever's holding them back. And I know that that tends to mean that you're being kind of self-righteous, because if you're assuming that their growth is always coming around to your point of view, then you might be hung up on something. But point being, if compassion is the thing to strive for, to wish people well on their journey towards compassion. I mean, again, not when they resort to violence, and you have to address that in a different way. But the words and the discussions that are ongoing, that will now be more difficult because of this thing. You know, whenever possible, to try to keep it civil, to try to maintain some dignity. And actually, there's one thing I'll add. I won't go on too far, but I'm gonna like this. Uh, Now, I thought of the quote earlier, and I hope I'm right. I didn't bother to look it up, but I believe it was Voltaire who said, "I may disagree. I'm paraphrasing, but I may disagree with your opinion, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." That's a thing that gets thrown around, and I don't honestly think there are that many people who really carry that belief about every conceivable expression of free speech. Um, but it points to a kind of paradox that I think is really difficult to understand, which is that if you really believe in freedom, it means that you have to allow for people to use that freedom in ways you don't like, and that might mean, you know, not only having opinions about other races or genders or points of view or whatever, and actually trying to influence the system to hold those people back. It's like, in a real free speech environment, it's like you have to allow for that to exist too, and fight it with your goodwill and your message of the opposite of that thing, of hate and exclusion. If you're meeting hate and exclusion, it's not going to be with the same. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere if you're just meeting it with the same thing. Then it's just a question of who's more powerful. But if you were really meeting that message with compassion, including the understanding that those people need the right to say what they're saying, what's on their minds, it's not good. And when it actually leads to real acts of violence, it's a fucking tragedy, and it breaks my heart. And it's the kind of thing that's like, I just keep coming back to the idea that it didn't have to happen. At that protest, everybody should have been able to go home and fucking sleep in their bed and get up the next day and live to learn and love and do whatever else, even if their point of view is somehow repellent to you, or vice versa, depending on what side you fall on. I think we do lack this real kind of philosophical backbone of letting people be wrong in our eyes and still allowing them to have the space to exist, um, even when it means really difficult, entrenched, political decisions and policy and things that really affect people's lives and deaths. that's still part of it, but that just renouncing the conversation entirely and just driving your car, shooting a gun, throwing a fist, even, like, all of that is all giving up on the discourse and on the conversation, and that's a fucking tragedy too. So I don't know. I hope, to anybody who cares enough to listen to this, that in the midst of something like that, that you can see the good in people in your own group, in the opposite group, and we can all look at that behavior and judge it as wrong, or not be around to the idea yet and not be ready to judge it. Well, I am emphasizing non-judgment, but I mean to say, to come around to the compassionate point of view, that you shouldn't resort to violence when you disagree with people. Um, so I don't know. It's Life certainly does test you, doesn't it? So with that, good luck.